it was crickets. And listen, I think that a lot of the scrutiny did end up lighting a fire under a lot of people's butts. I mean, Roberto Rodriguez has been dropping news like crazy, surprisingly. And I won't have much more to say about that, but I don't think it's only the reporters. I think it is the league and the players and what they're actually willing to go on the record with. So it is a bit of a combination. And when you're in a free agency period like this, fans want to know, they want to get a few nuggets of information. So I think this was kind of a teaching moment for everybody involved. And I was just about to hit export on this video when a bomb dropped, and it is that Kelsey Mitchell has signed a 1-year contract with the Indiana Fever. Okay, so later on in my video, I'm going to say the biggest news is that Nneka going over to the Sparks, which, you know, arguably is. However, I think that Kelsey Mitchell signing to the Indiana Fever for a 1-year super max contract is pretty big. It does seem like all the teams
in that veteran group, she's already spoken openly about feeling undervalued, and putting someone like Skylar Diggins-Smith in the same locker room as Caitlin Clark, who represents the exact kind of attention and opportunity the older generation didn't fully receive, could easily create tension or resentment, which is why the situation becomes so delicate, because what we're really seeing now is Sata Sabaly preparing to get paid, likely by an expansion franchise like the Golden State Valkyries. That's desperate to make an immediate splash, where she becomes the face of a new identity and a max contract centerpiece, while the Phoenix Mercury try to retool around Brittany Griner and Kalia Copper, hoping they can replace lost production through depth, turning it into a gamble on both sides, and meanwhile Diggins-Smith will still attract interest, but the real question is whether the Indiana Fever are wise enough to avoid a bad fit, because what they actually need is a steady backup. Point guard who can run the system when Caitlin Clark rests without demanding a spotlight, and that has never really been her role, so forcing that Indiana narrative connection would be risky, especially as the new CBA continues to reshape the league, breaking up talent concentrations, dismantling potential super teams, and pushing franchises into tough financial decisions where even successful cores become expensive to maintain, creating a free agency environment that is far less predictable than before and putting expansion teams at the center of the league's next competitive shift. If the Golden State Valkyries handle their roster building correctly around Sata Sabaly, balancing talent with fit instead of just stacking names, they absolutely have a real shot at becoming playoff ready quickly. But if they chase big contracts without cohesion, they risk turning a promising expansion launch into years of instability, and that same pressure applies to Portland and Toronto as they enter the league, because this is their rare chance to build structure from scratch the right way. And for the Indiana Fever, the decision on Skylar Diggins-Smith would say a lot about their direction, whether they're fully committed to building around Caitlin Clark with smart-fitting, role-defined pieces, or whether they lean into nostalgia and emotional storylines that don't necessarily match basketball needs. With Clark already operating as the engine of the offense, alongside Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell forming a strong young core, Indiana is in a position where every roster move should be about fit, spacing, and chemistry rather than name value or sentiment. As for Sabaly, her path is the most straightforward but also the most volatile. She's clearly positioned to become the focal point somewhere, likely with a franchise like Golden State or another expansion market, but whether that turns into winning or just a heavy usage role on a developing team will depend entirely on how smartly that roster is constructed around her.
That the Chicago Sky and the Los Angeles Sparks are actually in discussions to trade Ariel Atkins for Rickea Jackson. Now, a lot of people think this is wild and Rickea Jackson is way better than Ariel Atkins, but statistically, she actually isn't. Now, I think Rickea Jackson definitely has more upside than Ariel Atkins. I think Ariel Atkins already hit the top of her game, but defensively, Ariel is a little better than Rickea Jackson. Statistically, she is a little better than Rickea Jackson. And if the Sparks are looking to win now, I don't see this as a crazy move. But if you're a team that's looking to build a little bit for the future, I personally would have kept Rickea Jackson. She did note that nothing was finalized, and that would come tomorrow, Saturday, April 11th, which is the signing day. Now, with Nneka signing with the Los Angeles Sparks, a lot of people are saying goodbye to Dearica Hamby, but she was getting a little spicy on social media and responded to some of this. One person talked about how she was going to be cut. Her response was a lot of laughing emojis saying, "Please, I was on every call to design that thing. Doubt it," all caps. And Dearica Hamby is more of a center position. I think that Nneka Ogwumike.
I can easily see teams like the Golden State Valkyries, along with the upcoming Portland and Toronto expansion franchises, making serious pushes to land Sada Sabaly on a max contract and install her as their clear number one option, because she's going to attract a ton of interest and has the kind of presence that can immediately create a major impact, especially for new organizations that need a true centerpiece rather than trying to piece things together with role players, since what they really need is someone who can walk into the building and instantly shift the culture. And Sabaly has the talent to be that player anywhere, stepping into Golden State or another market as the primary option from day one, something she never fully had with the Phoenix Mercury while Diana Taurasi remained the focal point. But there's also a real layer of risk here, because Sabaly has a track record, having pushed her way out of the Dallas Wings earlier in her career and being openly vocal, sometimes to the point of distraction, about her contract situation. So any franchise offering her a max deal is essentially betting that once she's paid and made the centerpiece, those concerns will settle. Yet Dallas already learned that talent alone doesn't guarantee chemistry, even with strong pieces around her, and now Phoenix finds itself in a similar situation, losing a high-level player after just one season, which starts to look less like coincidence and more like a pattern worth watching.
Broadcasting for games this upcoming season, I don't exactly know how that's going to work out and when she'll be broadcasting. Sophie Cunningham, if you're out there, reach out to me. Let's talk about it. But let's move on to the Chicago Sky, because after the Angel Reese trade, the Chicago Sky fans were just in utter disarray. It was depressing. There was nothing going on, and everyone was thinking that Jeff Pagliuca was the dumbest GM in the history of GMs. And I did mention, I did not think that this was the end of it, because they did save a lot of their players from the expansion draft from getting taken. So I was thinking they were going to be using a lot of those players in some sort of another trade. Lo and behold, the Rickea Jackson, Skylar Diggins, Ariel Atkins thing going on. It might be a 3-team trade. The news has not dropped yet, but it also just might be the sparks in the sky. I know that there is a 3-team trade looming. There is not news on that as of today or as of this moment. I'm sure there's so much more going to be dropping today. But the Chicago Sky, if all of these rumors do happen and pen hits paper, they are becoming a team that I am kind of interested in seeing how shakes out. With Skylar Diggins running the point, I don't exactly know what is going to happen to Courtney Vandersloot. They might use her as a trade asset for another team. I know that Courtney Vandersloot definitely mentioned she is going to be recovering from the ACL injury that she got last season, and she would be returning to the court. I don't know at her age and with her injury if she is a player that is very desirable. She might turn into a bench player or a vet.
Let's break down Skylar Diggins-Smith's track record, because the pattern is hard to ignore. The Seattle Storm moved on from her quickly, with head coach Noel Quinn essentially deciding after one season that it wasn't the right fit, and before that, during her time with the Phoenix Mercury, there were well-documented tensions, including clashes with Diana Taurasi. So while her talent as a starting-level point guard has never been in question, the recurring issue has been the friction that seems to follow her from team to team, and that's exactly what the Indiana Fever don't need right now, because they already have Caitlin Clark firmly established as the face of the franchise and the primary ball handler coming off a historic rookie season where she led the league in assists, alongside Kelsey Mitchell navigating her own contract situation and adjusting to new head coach Stephanie White. Plus, Aaliyah Boston continuing her growth into a dominant interior presence, meaning the last thing this roster needs is another high-usage personality expecting significant minutes and touches, because Diggins-Smith isn't coming in to play a limited bench role. At 34, she still views herself as a starter and a primary playmaker, but with the offense already running through Clark, the real question becomes where exactly she would fit without disrupting what's already working.
Fam and AZ Fudd, and then some people pepper in the idea of Olivia Miles. The Dallas Wings did let Louisa Geisel-Soder go in the expansion draft, leaving room for another big to come in, leading a lot of speculation that that would be Awa Fam drafted at number 1, especially after AZ Fudd's performance in the last couple of games. But Paige Bueckers is the star player on the Dallas Wings, and you want to keep your star players happy. Paige has a connection with AZ, has played with her before, I'm sure wants to be close to her. They are dating. And while I don't think it's the number 1 priority to draft AZ Fudd to keep Paige Bueckers happy, it is something I am thinking about. Paige Bueckers is their star player. She is their franchise player. And they have the opportunity to have someone big under the basket that can fill that role that they definitely look like they needed last season. The problem is passing on a 19-year-old with that much upside is a gamble. And Curt Miller is the GM for the Dallas Wings. He built up that Connecticut Sun team who went to the playoffs over and over. He was building up the Los Angeles Sparks before he was ousted. So he is a person who likes to build teams. He sees the big picture. Another bit of news that just dropped was that Gabby Williams is set to not return to the Seattle Storm. And losing Gabby Williams, they have lost their big 3, essentially. Nneka, Skylar, and now Gabby Williams. They do still have Dominique Malonga, but Ezi Magbagor is also kind of one of those players that people are wondering, like, what is going to happen with Ezi?
And here's the deeper layer to this. Skylar Diggins-Smith was a full-blown superstar at University of Notre Dame, and if Nil had existed back then, she likely would have been a millionaire before ever stepping onto a WNBA court. That's how big her presence was, with endorsements, national attention, and the spotlight firmly on her as one of the faces of women's college basketball. And that kind of status isn't easy to move on from, especially now as she watches Caitlin Clark receive that same level of attention but magnified on an entirely different scale due to social media and the current cultural moment, getting the visibility, financial opportunities, and admiration that players of Diggins-Smith's era never fully experienced, creating a potentially complicated dynamic that goes beyond basketball and into identity, legacy, and recognition. So when you put everything together, what we're really seeing is the new CBA forcing teams into impossible choices, where Phoenix had 3 max-level players and could realistically keep only 2, choosing Brittany Griner and Kalia Copper while Satu Sabali walks. And this isn't a one-off situation, it's something that's about to ripple across the entire league, with teams like Connecticut Sun dealing with their own max contract pressures, Los Angeles Sparks trying to hold their core together, and Minnesota Lynx facing a closing window with a veteran roster, while expansion franchises like the Golden State Valkyries, Portland, and Toronto suddenly become major power players with the cap space to offer max deals without sacrificing depth, giving them the ability to promise stars a chance to be the face of something new, which for someone like Sabali, who's been vocal about wanting recognition and top-tier pay, is extremely appealing. But here's the part no one is really addressing: what happens when those expansion teams realize that handing out max contracts doesn't automatically translate into winning, because the WNBA isn't built like the NBA where one superstar can carry an average roster deep into the playoffs. The talent level across the league is too strong and the competition too tight, meaning success depends on chemistry, defined roles, and a functioning system. So if you're talking about Sabali leading a roster filled with expansion picks and minimum contracts, the real question becomes whether that formula can actually produce wins or if it just creates another top-heavy team without the balance needed to compete. They don't really have a choice, because building purely through the draft isn't realistic in a league with only 3 rounds, so expansion teams have to make a splash in free agency to generate excitement and sell tickets, which is exactly why Satu Sabali is so appealing as a face of the franchise signing. But the real question comes 2 years down the line. If a team like the Golden State Valkyries is stuck near the bottom while committing a huge portion of their cap to one player, what's the next move? Because max money alone doesn't guarantee success, and that brings us back to the Indiana Fever situation with Skylar Diggins-Smith, which is a completely different kind of challenge. Since Indiana doesn't need another star with Caitlin Clark already in place, they need role players who fit cleanly and don't disrupt chemistry, and Diggins-Smith, despite her talent, has never really been that type of player, having always operated as a primary guard, a lead option, and a vocal presence, so expecting her to step into a reduced role behind Clark would mean asking her to fundamentally change who she's been throughout her career. And while there are teams that could make more sense for her, like the Chicago Sky building around Angel Reese, or the Connecticut Sun if they lose Alyssa Thomas, Indiana feels more like a feel-good narrative than a logical basketball fit, especially when you factor in age, with Diggins-Smith at 34 and likely having only a couple of high-level seasons left, while the Fever are building long-term around a young core of Clark, Aaliyah Boston, and Kelsey Mitchell, making it hard to justify investing major resources into a timeline that doesn't align. And on top of all that, there's the broader dynamic playing out across the league, the subtle tension between the veteran generation that helped build the WNBA and the new wave now receiving unprecedented attention and financial opportunities. A shift that adds another layer of complexity to where someone like Diggins-Smith ultimately fits moving forward.
Be the wildest free agency news because also Kayla McBride has a ruptured eardrum, was not able to play in Fibonacci right now. I think she was stuck because she couldn't fly. So who knows how she's going to be this coming season. I think what I thought the Chicago Sky would be is actually turning out to be the Minnesota Lynx. But anything is possible. Although this is kind of one of those situations that you kind of see as kind of a downward spiral. Every time I think I'm done editing this video, we get a new bomb drop, and that is that Nneka Ogwumike is re-signing with the Dallas Wings, which I don't think anybody predicted. Now, she was cored by the Dallas Wings, so she is eligible for the Supermax, but according to Alexa Philippou, she is negotiating to take less than the Supermax, but it is still a 7-figure deal, so over $1 million or maybe at $1 million, because she wants to help the team build a quality roster. Another bit of shocking new information is that Jewell Loyd is signing a 3-year contract with the Aces, and the Dream are keeping Alicia Gray to sign a 3-year deal. They are finalizing pen to paper to sign Brianna Jones. Again, I do think Brittany Griner is gonna go, so it is Alicia Gray. I'm assuming Ryan Howard, Bree Jones, and Angel Reese.
The modern WNBA media landscape is increasingly shaped by one central reality: attention drives value. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert has repeatedly emphasized that the league's growth depends on expanding broadcast reach, strengthening partnerships, and building a product that can scale across national and international platforms. That includes larger media deals, improved facilities, and more exposure through mainstream sports networks. Within that environment, Caitlin Clark has become a major catalyst for viewership and commercial interest. Her presence has coincided with increased attendance, higher television ratings, and more national coverage across both WNBA and NBA-adjacent programming. This is not about one player bypassing a system, but rather about how modern sports branding works. Top athletes today often operate across multiple media platforms, games, interviews, national broadcasts, and digital content, creating direct visibility that extends beyond their own league's traditional marketing channels. It's also important to separate perception from structure. While star players can significantly influence popularity and revenue, league operations, such as scheduling, salary caps, facility investments, and broadcast contracts, are still governed collectively through the league office and the players' union. That the growing interest from networks and sponsors is tied to a simple business equation: more demand leads to more inventory value. That's why increased investment in arenas, training facilities, and broadcast partnerships is happening alongside the league's expansion phase. Rather than a breakdown of control, what's really happening is a rapid scaling cycle. More attention, higher valuations, bigger media deals, more investment, higher expectations. And in that cycle, stars like Clark become central to the visibility of the league, but still operate within the same institutional structure as every other player. That they absolutely fundamentally know that none of this massive corporate infrastructure survives without the CEO. Indiana Fever front office might be completely distracted by highly irrelevant broadcasting side quests. The veteran players might be actively how to artificially secure the absolute maximum Supermax contracts. But the free market is coldly, ruthlessly dictating the exact terms of the corporate civil war. The Indiana Fever front office is currently standing on the precipice of absolute, unmitigated global dominance. But they immediately purge their organization of any remaining executive incompetence. They must completely stop pretending that a $78 million facility built by their own executive brilliance. They must actively admit that they are merely the temporary custodians of an absolute global. If they brilliantly flawlessly execute the upcoming expansion draft and the brutal free agency period, they will build a multi-year dynasty. If they panic to the toxic locker room politics,